Hey everyone, so we're back for another episode of TezTalks Radio. You guys should know me by now. My name is Mercer True, and I'm joined by my co-host and confidant, Stu Elms. So hey, Stu.
Hi, everybody.
So to kick things off, if we've kept abreast of Tezos activity as of late, there have been a few interesting developments in the ecosystem. Most notably, we saw Tezos hit global headlines because of a landmark deal. The English football team, or soccer to the Americans listening, Manchester United made Tezos its official blockchain and training kit partner. And there is something just so satisfying about seeing, Cristiano Ronaldo donning the Tezos logo on his chest. So what did you say to that, Stu?
Well, I think associating the Tezos brand with one of the most globally recognized sports teams in history is probably a good thing for Tezos.
Just probably.
Most likely.
So anyway, news of this major partnership actually brings us tidily into today's conversation, which actually focuses on how the world's biggest brands can and are getting stuck into, this world of Web3, of blockchain and the metaverse. And so for that, we've called upon Tom Simpson, AdColony's Senior Vice President of Asia Pacific, to share his expertise. So welcome, Tom. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing, guys? All good?
All
By
good.
the way, I'm a Liverpool fan, not a Man United fan. So I'm already taking an extremely awkward turn.
That's why I said probably, because there are almost as many Man United haters out there as there are Man United lovers, right?
Yeah, no, I know, but they're a massive team. There's always so much respect between Liverpool and Man United. You know what I mean? You love to hate them, really.
Absolutely. Let's start off with a little bit of background info about yourself and what you do. AdColony is a mobile advertising platform and is engaged with some of the world's biggest brands. What exactly does AdColony offer to these big global brands?
Yeah, cool. So, we're AdColony. We're the largest global in-app advertising platform. So fundamentally, brands come to us because they understand that within apps, there's a huge audience of consumers that they want to speak to. We primarily run video advertising within apps, and our supply. When you think about what consumers are doing when they're on apps, they're doing one of two things, right? They're either messing around in social, so TikToking or whatever it is, or the other sort of 50% of time is spent playing mobile games. So AdColony, our platform focuses on getting ads within mobile games, so giving brands the opportunity to reach consumers when they're within mobile games with video advertising.
Very cool. So as I understand it, you've been pretty bullish about and vocal about the growth of Web3 and the metaverse as a key marketing opportunity for brands. I'm excited to get into that a little deeper, but before we do, can you tell us a little bit about your personal crypto journey and how you got your start in the space?
Yeah, cool. I first bought Bitcoin back in 2015, and I bought Ethereum in 2016. So I bought Bitcoin at like $300, ETH at $20. So this is a long time ago, and I, interested in blockchain, interested in the space. Obviously, I think anybody who was in crypto at that time went through 2017 when suddenly I was like, whoa.
What a time to be alive.
Oh, this is insane. And then hodled all the way up and then hodled all the way back down again. Didn't look at my wallet, I would say, for the whole of sort of 2019. And then started to pay attention again. I hold quite a bit of Link, and Link started to kind of pick up, and that, kind of piqued my interest. But more than that, what was exciting was, 2017 was just, it was froth. It was kind of, this is what the technology can do, but nobody's actually doing anything. We're just speculating on random tokens that might do something at some point in the future. Whereas what's happened in this cycle and what we started to see in 2020, probably with DeFi summer, was actual usage. People starting to use blockchains, Web3 technology to do things. So, I mean, DeFi was the first iteration of that. I think more recently, what we've seen that's really exciting is blockchain gaming, GameFi, and play to earn as being genuine spaces where people are using the technology. And then obviously kind of alongside that, NFTs, lots of NFT trading going on, whether on Web2 platforms like OpenSea or kind of, you know, other more Web3 type places. So that's my journey. But I'd say more than that, I've kind of come into the space from a much longer kind of career perspective. I started my career in digital in the mid 2000s. And I came into, I'd always been interested in the internet and the web. And when I came into the space, I mean, this is something that I'm sure we can talk about in a bit more detail, is how kind of fundamental advertising is to Web 2. But anyway, ads, you know, are fundamental to Web 2. And I came into kind of the internet and I just kind of saw, okay, advertising is what Web 2 is all about. It's what social is all about. It's the monetization layer for Web 2. So I kind of got sucked into this journey down digital advertising, ad tech, you know, which has been really exciting because it's where the action is in Web 2. Web 3 monetization is not going to be about advertising. We're probably not quite sure what it's going to be about, but it's going to be about other things. But it's starting to see that shift coming out of gaming, consumers spending much more time in gaming being kind of one of the key platforms that helps us, you know, where the metaverse emerges from. So my kind of personal journey from Web 2 advertising into gaming advertising, and then beginning to understand that out of gaming, that's one of the, you know, it's the fulcrum for the metaverse and Web 3. So two different journeys into Web 3 and the metaverse.
Yeah, I think it's a matter of basically seeing both of these worlds evolving, converging, but also kind of morphing to develop something entirely different. And that's where we are seeing the world's major brands, from Manchester United, as we mentioned already, Formula One teams, you know, game developers, all of them are sort of getting into this crypto game or this blockchain universe. But when we look at these brands, and as they are trying to, I guess, future-proof themselves or prepare themselves for this Web3 universe, what is it that you think is their primary appeal to get involved? Like, what is the thing that makes them most excited to actually delve into this world?
I mean, hype, FOMO. I mean, there's a huge buzz around, you know, the metaverse as being the next iteration. So I think it's just kind of, you know, taking it back. What brands understand is that we are going through a paradigm shift from a Web 2 world driven by social, mobile and apps, to a Web 3 world driven by blockchains, gaming and the metaverse. And brands naturally want to be a part of that. I think the key sort of FOMO point for brands, honestly, is as much as kind of, you know, young people don't have as much money as old people, and this is kind of a constant thing that you say to brands is, yeah, but actually, who's got the money to spend on your product? Brands obsess about advertising to, you know, younger generations. In the same way that at the beginning of Web 2, it was all about millennials and how are we going to advertise to millennials. And so, you know, brands FOMOing into Facebook and Snapchat, whatever, you know, kind of social platforms are there, and feeling that that's the most important thing in the world to their, you know, to their brand execution. What we've got on this iteration is, you know, brands looking at Gen Z behavior, which is, and I mean, Gen Zs spend so much of their time hanging out in games, right? I mean, Fortnite, I was watching a Louis Theroux documentary on BBC Two yesterday about the rise of the new alt-right in America. Very scary topic, but anyway, whatever. But a lot of those guys met within Fortnite, and they were saying that Fortnite is sort of, you know, it's the new golf club, you know, 19th hole of Generation Z. And I mean, that's how fundamental it is. So anyway, I mean, the basics here, you know, are Gen Z games. That's where they spend time with their friends, and they, you know, their behavior within games has evolved from playing games to, they spend a lot of time hanging out, watching concerts, whatever it is, loads of other stuff emerging within games. But games is that center point. Brands want to be after Gen Z, and that's what's really kind of pulling them into gaming, the metaverse, Web3.
And they're predicted to be an enormously wealthy generation as well, aren't they?
Especially if they're buying crypto.
Gen Z. Yeah, totally. I mean, if they buy crypto, I imagine they will be. I think beyond that, opportunities.
Well, I think there's a lot of inheritance coming their way, right?
Yeah.
So essentially what we're looking at is, for brands, the primary opportunity is to target a concentrated group of extremely digitally native consumers, and they are Gen Z in this case. And so in that sense, would you say that, the FOMO that brought these brands to social media being the same FOMO that's going to bring a lot of these brands into metaverse development and this Web3 universe is going to be substantial enough to basically help, not validate, but to really bring the potential of this technology to life?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'm being slightly facetious. I mean, and we're all being slightly facetious talking about, kind of brands FOMOing in, because there's a hell of a lot of substance to it. It makes sense for brands to advertise to younger generations because there's a kind of flip effect of everybody wants to feel young and blah, blah, blah. So, there's a lot of data sitting behind the idea that, yes, actually, although it's Gen Z who spend loads of time gaming, that halo effect is now reaching into millennials, Gen X, older generations as well. Baby boomers spend a lot of time playing games, playing mobile games. I mean, the exact behavior is quite different. And of course, a lot of this is driven by the pandemic, right? So, 2-3 years ago, whilst the sort of base consumer behavior was there, we weren't spending as much time in gaming and the metaverse, whereas post-pandemic, I mean, I think there's a sort of an idea that centuries don't always start on time. They don't see the 21st century didn't start on January the 1st, 2000 or 2001 technically, but anyway. But they start, whenever. And the pandemic, COVID, has been what's really kicked us into the 21st century. The pandemic, COVID has been, okay, you're all now spending most of your time in the metaverse. I mean, really, we're in the metaverse talking to each other here, aren't we? We've socialized in the metaverse, we've worked in the metaverse, and we've had this kind of crash course in the metaverse for the past 2 years. And that's really changed the way that consumers behave, consumers think about the online space. It's much less transactional, much less, just go online and buy something, blah, blah. It's, it's a real kind of living, breathing entity for people in a way that it wasn't 2-3 years ago. And that's kind of all generations. So we now see older generations more comfortable with gaming and the metaverse as well.
Absolutely. And I definitely agree with that. And it's definitely sped things up in a way that no one anticipated, right?
Yeah.
And the opportunity that's been presented is huge. So for a brand that wants to dive in to engage these audiences on these platforms, sort of by way of decentralized technology, what would you say they should start off by doing? Like, what would the first steps be for a brand toward engaging those audiences?
So I think the first thing that brands need to do is get their heads around what Web3 is, what the Web3 opportunity is. And I think there's 3 big mental models that we always talk about with brands who are thinking about coming into the metaverse that make the metaverse Web3 different. So I think the first one is a shift from advertising is the model to value exchange is the model. So this is about that change from kind of Web 2 to Web 3. So Web 2 monetization is all about advertising, right? All the big Web 2 businesses are advertising businesses. Google, Facebook, they're ad businesses. Even the ones that aren't ad businesses, like Apple and Amazon, they end up becoming ad businesses. Apple's done a hell of a lot to screw over Facebook recently by stopping them tracking consumers and using that to kind of bootstrap their own ad business. Amazon is now building out this huge DSP, huge kind of commercial commerce, e-commerce enterprise. So yeah, I mean, Web 2 is about advertising. It's about aggregating eyeballs onto a pinch point that you created, two-sided opportunity, and then monetizing those eyeballs with ads. Web 3 is not about that for loads of different reasons that I'm sure you've delved into on other podcasts. But I mean, suffice it to say that Web 3 monetization is going to be about, trading. It's going to be about work tokenization. It's got loads of kind of new digital primitives in there. But in Web 3, advertising is not going to be the driving force. And I think that's the key. One of the big steps that brands have got to get their heads around is that in Web 2, it's all about ads. You know, it's easy to connect with consumers because it's just fundamentally an advertising opportunity, the same as TV, really data driven, all these kind of clever stuff. But it's really just a kind of TV broadcast. Whereas Web3 is very, very different. They're no longer the biggest game in town. And brands need to be respectful. They need to be authentic. They need to offer value exchange in the way that they interact with consumers. And a really good way of thinking about that is something that we see in mobile gaming. So whereas on YouTube, if you want to show an ad, I mean, you just, I want to watch some content. Okay, YouTube says, here's an ad, watch that for at least 6 seconds before you're allowed to get the thing that you want, which is the video that you want to watch. Whereas mobile gaming video advertising is, I'm playing a mobile game, I run out of lives, I get to a screen that says, either pay this much to get some more lives or watch a video ad and get it for free. So there's a real kind of sense of value exchange in there that the consumer understands that they're getting something. I mean, we don't really think, we don't really kind of think about the fact that, brands pay for so many of the things that we like. Brands pay for YouTube, but you don't really think about that. You just think you've got to watch the ad, whereas just makes that value exchange really explicit. It's also choice in there. And that's something that we're going to see in Web3 because of different kinds of, ways of being able to pay for things. So lots more choice. So that value exchange is really, really key. So I think that's the first thing that we talk about with brands as to how Web3 is different from Web 2. I think the second one is kind of from consumers being the product to consumers kind of owning the product. And that's really interesting because, this goes back into that kind of ad model, but the way that Web 2 works is Facebook gets loads of data on us via that pinch point that they've created and uses that to deliver advertising better than anybody else. So they collect loads of data and they, target us with ads extremely accurately. In a Web3 world, it's much easier for consumers to kind of own and manage their own data. So I think we can all see, anybody that's been involved in NFTs or DeFi could kind of understand that your mobile wallet is like your identity, and think of a world where maybe you could sort of stake a token on a website to earn value from the data that you are generating by moving around in a Web3 metaverse. And to me, that seems like a fairly sort of simple next step execution. So brands are going to be like, okay, but at the moment we kind of own all this data on you and we use it to target you and we don't have to pay for it. And, this is brilliant. Whereas in a Web3 world, consumers are going to be, again, sort of, that value exchange. They'll understand what's going on with brands. They'll have an opportunity to monetize from it and say, I don't want to participate in this, or I do want to participate in it.
Well, I think there's always been sort of a general discomfort out there with the idea of being the product, right? So the sort of mental leap from we control the pinch points and therefore we can ask for whatever data we want and people will give it to us, to we have to have something of value on offer in order to get that data is a big but an important one, right? And probably at the end of the day, much, much better for consumers.
Huge.
But But then you could argue that at the same time, to basically position the consumer in control of all their data, you make them therefore responsible for how they sell and allow it to be used. And I'm not sure yet whether that level of, or like that perception of social responsibility is really salient in people's minds. The ownership of data is fantastic, and we should all be able to own our own data. But insofar as seeing how it's going to be used or who we sell it to is going to beg a lot more questions that I don't think each individual has answered for themselves yet, and what what sort of boundaries they want to put in place when they do interact with brands, because
Totally.
you could argue it could be considered selling a bit of your soul as well. It's always fine when
digital
we're not
soul.
responsible. Yeah, if it's happening against our will, then, we didn't have a choice and we grumble about it, but it continues. But then when we do have the choice, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how people use that power. But to flip this ever so slightly is, Sue's question was great in understanding how what brands need to understand when entering into this sphere. But then at the same time, the people who are actually designing this technology, the core developers or the teams that are working with these brands to introduce into the space, what do they need to be cognizant of when engaging with brands so that they actually can deliver this notion of value to them?
Marissa, I think that's a really difficult question. I'm afraid I don't really have any, I'm not sure I've got any good answers for that. Brands are commercial entities, and they will come into this space in a very, with a very different mindset. So I think the sort of core Web3, decentralized, BIDL, whatever it is. One thing that I talk about with brands is how important partnership is in the Web3 space, and how being authentic with the companies that they want to partner with is really important. We all know how, the Web3 community can be sensitive. I think dial that up by 1,000 when looking at the gamer community, and how sensitive they are to brands coming in and being inauthentic in the space. So I think brands need to be really cognizant when they execute of the partners that are working with, and of being respectful to the platforms they're doing. But right now, honestly, there's a huge gap between the way that brands think about the world and the way that that Web3 thinks about the world. And there's a few, just really quickly, I think there's a couple of brands that I've seen recently kind of bridging that gap quite well. I think the first one is Adidas. It's basically, it's two. I'm going to go for two sneaker brands here, mostly because I like trainers. But there you go. Adidas, brilliant execution with Bored Ape Yacht Club. But actually, they weren't really partnering with Bored Ape Yacht Club. They were partnering with Punk's Comet, G Money, like some real kind of core Web3 NFT innovators and builders who kind of built their own IP around Bored Ape Yacht Club. And that just kind of, Adidas did a really cool drop. You could buy the NFT and then get access to exclusive Adidas items, in the future. That felt, it felt pretty authentic, felt quite cool, and the right way of doing things. So I thought that was good. And then, Nike coming in and buying Artifact, which is a completely different way of thinking about how brands operate in the space. But I actually think that points to some of the biggest kind of forward moves, in that we'll see a lot of brand acquisition in Web3, brands buying IP, buying technology.
So it's very much about really getting involved, not taking this top level superficial entry into the space and just saying, we've launched an NFT collection, versus saying, we've built communities here. We understand where you see the value and we want to share that with you. But at the same time, not all campaigns, no matter how well-intentioned, are actually met with support. For example, most recently, the WWF, the Wildlife Fund, not the Wrestling Federation, launched its I'm so sorry. It would have been so much more different. But they launched their non-fungible animal campaign on Polygon, and it was met with a lot of backlash because of the sustainability arguments, as you know, as just the tip of the iceberg. So in using that as a bit of a fable, what can companies actually learn from this in terms of how they help your day-to-day consumer who may not be, you know, blockchain native or involved in this world yet, to understand the merit of what they're attempting to achieve with their blockchain projects?
Okay. What, Marissa, what's the question?
So basically, like,
just kind of, it's the same as the previous question, or are you trying to get
no,
more?
it's more about, in seeing that, you know, it no matter how well you might design a campaign or sort of set up a project that is designed for blockchain or or Web3 in this instance, when met with this kind of backlash, like what can both brands and other blockchains learn from that sort of thing? Like, what are the things that perhaps this project missed that they should have done in order to prevent this sort of backlash?
Yeah, okay, cool. Good question. I mean, again, it's super boring. I think it's just, you know, authenticity is key. I think a lot of the authenticity to the space, but also authenticity to your brand values, right? And I think a lot of the backlash around WWF entering NFTs is one, that kind of sense that, you know, blockchains are not particularly environmentally friendly, NFTs are not massively environmentally friendly, and I know that's something that Tez, you know, does a great job around, and that's kind of a great point for Tez. But and I think secondly, the idea of non-fungible animals is just kind of, it's a little bit weird. It feels like keeping animals in captivity, and you know, it's kind of, that's not what WWF is all about. So that, you know, authenticity to your brand, thinking about how what you're going to do is, it will extrapolate into Web3 and blockchain. There are going to be a lot of crazy brands coming into, okay, not crazy brands, a load of old trad brands coming into Web3 and doing super weird stuff, right? Because this is just so early and nobody knows, and brands will kind of, you know, they'll give it to the intern in the same way that the joke 15 years ago was, oh, you know, give the Facebook account to the intern to manage or whatever. There will be a lot of brands coming in without just kind of, you know, doing the due diligence around how they should be entering the space. And I think that's something they've got to watch out for.
It's definitely something that's going to be extremely difficult for brands to navigate, right? Like probably much more difficult to navigate than anyone really understands at this point, because what we're talking about here is, you know, in the way that people engage with each other and the way that people function on a day-to-day basis, you know, Web3 in theory is going to be a huge part of people's lives, right? And a huge part of how they identify themselves. And because it's going to be so personal, clumsy attempts for brands to jump in are going to piss people off, right?
Yeah.
That's obviously a big challenge that brands are going to face, right? Like you said, it's in its infancy, and brands are kind of grappling with that now. Do you see any other challenges coming to the forefront at this stage in the game that you think people need to think about as they move into this space?
Well, I think this is something Marissa touched on earlier on briefly, was selling stuff online, right? And a big thing that brands have got to get their heads around is the idea that in, you know, 20 years time, they'll be making a lot of money from selling online things, not things online. I think brands at the moment spend so much of their time thinking about e-commerce, you know, absolutely fair. But I mean, the metaverse world is about huge opportunities for digital native retail enabled by the NFT standard. I mean, in 10 years' time, it would massively surprise me if Gucci wasn't making at least 50% of their revenue from selling handbags in the metaverse.
I said to a friend of mine the other day, like, I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I was saying she's not going to be bugging me to buy her the newest Nikes. She's going to be bugging me to buy the newest Nikes for her avatar.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, Marissa just deleted my other question. Go ahead, Marissa.
No, sorry, we're it's hard to explain what's happening behind the scenes. But yeah, no, that actually feeds very tightly into our next question of, like, if you had to cast a prediction of when this is going to become our norm for companies to engage in these marketplaces directly with their consumers in this really new and like innovative way. What's sort of your mental timeline? If we're getting Gucci bags in the metaverse in 10 years, who's first in the game? Are we looking at 3 years, 5 years? And who do you think is like also best positioned to seize this opportunity? We've mentioned the gaming world a few times. Do you think they're sort of coming out ahead of the pack?
Yeah, Marissa, absolutely. Really nice segue in there. And you're right. Because it is that spectrum that you talked about, right? So right now, the opportunity is gaming. And, you know, I think that, I mean, define the metaverse. Like, what is the metaverse? I mean, for me, the metaverse is probably when we start attaching more importance to things happening in a digital space than in the real world. I mean, I don't know, more importance. I mean, that sounds kind of a bit dystopian. But yeah,
but not impossible.
Sorry?
But not impossible.
Not impossible. No. Oh God. I mean, there will be people who really want that. And I mean, the eventual destination of humanity, I'm sure we'll all just be kind of, you know, our brains will be uploaded into the cloud and will be in the ether. But anyway, that's a lot further away than the metaverse. But I mean, so the metaverse, Web3, I mean, it's not about kind of VR goggles. It's kind of all around us. It's going to be augmented reality. It's going to be, screens, this screen, our mobile screen, the big screen in the corner of our room, whatever. It'll be all of that stuff. But it will be when our digital lives become really, really significant to us. So kind of thinking about that as the way of framing it, it does exactly, Marissa, start with gaming. And if you look at gamers, you could say that these are people whose lives, you know, within a digital space are already of, you know, maybe more significance than their lives, their investment. You know, if you look at the spending patterns of gamers, they're probably spending, you know, more money in games than maybe in e-commerce or whatever. So I mean, that's the starting point for it, is that kind of consumer behavior. And they're not just hardcore gamers. I mean, obviously, you know, mums playing on mobile games on their iPhones, whatever it is. So that's kind of the starting point. So that's right now. So brands can invest in gaming and the metaverse right now via ads, via whatever. When we actually start spending, consumers at scale start spending time with Web3 primitives, I mean, that's a lot further away. If you look at a nice way of kind of tracking it, is thinking about percentage of total people in the world that are engaged with the protocol. And if you look at where we are with Web3, we're about kind of 1994 in terms of the internet, in terms of the percentage of the world population that is engaged and spending time with that protocol. So if we're in kind of 1994 in internet time, then it's going to be a long time before this is a, you know, really significant opportunity for brands. And it also tells us that we've still got kind of the .com bubble ahead of us. We've still got a lot of those basic principles to be built. But yeah, I mean, I think genuine significance for brands is probably 5 years away, and, you know, mass adoption is 10, 15 years away still. But I mean, as we said, that doesn't mean that brands won't be investing now, and smart ones, of course.
They certainly should be, right?
Yeah, of course. Tons are.
So we're sort of coming towards the end of the pod here. One thing that I often like to do, like I keep my ear to the ground on social and stuff like that. And when I hear questions emerge from the chatter, I like to, if we get a guest that I think might have an answer that I can use in those conversations, I like to try to get it. So what I've been hearing very, very recently, we've just had the Super Bowl in the States, and there was some crypto advertising during the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And there's, it's sort of a part of a larger marketing push that's happening in the space in general. We're starting to see crypto ads on TV. We're starting to see them in the cinema before the movie starts, things like that. And the way that I'm seeing it spun by an awful lot of people is that this is a sign of desperation, that crypto has to keep attracting new people in order for it to survive, and that the only reason money is being put into marketing right now is to keep it on life support. If somebody was presenting that point to you, how would you respond to that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Ponzi's always need new entrants. Otherwise, how can they succeed? Absolutely. I mean, basic Ponzinomics. Yeah, I actually, I think that's absolutely, in terms of the total kind of advertising spend out there, this is kind of insignificant. But I actually view it as something else, which is a real kind of confidence in the space and a sort of coming of age moment. I thought the Coinbase ad was absolutely brilliant. It felt very kind of right for a post-COVID, post-social metaverse era that we're moving into. I thought it was really interesting. It was gaming themed, right? I mean, it was. You've seen it. Have you seen the Coinbase?
I have, but would you mind describing it for our listeners as well?
Okay, describe. Okay,
it's very hard to describe because it's so
recount
simple.
the ad.
Yeah, that's Marissa.
We could always just provide a link to it so everyone can watch it after this.
Black screen, a QR code bouncing around with gaming music playing in the background for 60 seconds. So, I mean, I just thought that was super cool. So it felt like gaming. And that's, okay, big tick, cultural touch point at the moment. We're entering the gaming metaverse era. It was just a QR code. So it was mobile, it was direct response, but there's something kind of uniquely post-COVID about that. Like, how many consumers would have known really what a QR code was before we had to check in everywhere we go, look at restaurant menus with a QR code, whatever it is.
Was there any data on how many people accessed that QR code?
20 million in 1 minute.
That's pretty good. That's money well spent, right?
It's insane. Yeah. I mean, they crashed the site momentarily, but Coinbase app went from 180 something to number 2 in the App Store. But it just felt confident. It felt so uniquely confident. Like, just, so many brands would have overdone that, but it felt like Coinbase as maybe they're a Web3 brand. We'll be kind to them. They're not decentralized, but they're a Web3 brand. But it felt like maybe a traditional brand would have tried to overdone that. Lots of the other ads are celebrities or blah blah blah. But Coinbase is that kind of Web3 ethos, had the confidence to just kind of do something that was, in tune with the times, was simple, demanded a response, was kind of a bit more memey and kind of hacky.
That's very memey.
Bidlery sort of thing, and it just felt like this is confidence. This is what it's all about. So I just think it's completely the opposite.
And I think to add on to that is that I think often the most vocal naysayers are those that focus on the volatility of the cryptocurrency market rather than understanding the fundamentals of the technology. That's something that I think this entire industry, no matter what chain you're supporting, has to face time and time again. And I agree with you that basically that ad very simply managed to kind of hop onto and then drive the zeitgeist in terms of positioning, you know, this nostalgic video game aesthetic with a very forward-looking move. And it was very, very well done. I was extremely impressed by it. But yeah, I think that's going to be a kind of a leading example of where brands can go in this space, how they don't actually have to overcomplicate what they're doing in order to get involved. But as we've already discussed as well, plenty of lessons to learn before everyone starts to jump in the pool. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives as always. I think you've given us a really good look at how mainstream companies can rethink about this space, and for it to be less of an intimidating journey, and as well as, you know, people on the other side of the equation and what they need to think about when brands do enter this space and whether there's a genuine value proposition or not. So thank you for all of your insights, and hopefully we'll have you back on again soon to share more.
Thanks for having me, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Enormously interesting. I loved it. Thank you very much.